Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Sahar Sabri. I'm an interventional radiologist in Washington, D.C. at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital, and I'm a member of the VIVA Foundation Board of Directors. As part of the fulfillment of our mission statement, the VIVA Foundation strives to develop collaboration between all stakeholders in vascular disease. Tonight, we are pleased to bring the medical device innovation to bring together expert physicians, industry, and FDA, and the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, MDIC, with the shared long-term goal of advancing patient care. I'll be co-moderating tonight's webinar, VIVA-FDA Townhall, Navigating the Early Feasibility Regulatory Pathway for Medical Devices, with my fellow VIVA board member, Dr. Eric Sisemski, interventional cardiologist from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Harvard Medical School. So I'm pleased to introduce a really impressive panel with us. So from the FDA, we have Dr. Donna Buckley, Medical Officer for the Peripheral Interventionalist Device Team at the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Dr. Andrew Farb, co-leader of the FDA's Early Feasibility Study Program and the Chief Medical Officer of the Office of Cardiovascular Diseases. From the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, MDIC, Ellen Mejas, head of the Center for Evidence and Patient Engagement of the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. Our industry delegate, Mr. Chris Owens, President and CEO of R3 Vascular. We also have our exceptional clinical panelist, Dr. Mahmoud Razavi, interventional radiologist at St. Joseph's Heart and Vascular Center, a well-known innovator. And Dr. Brian DeRobertis, vascular surgeon at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center and a VIVA board member. Eric here will introduce our next part and introduce the presentations. Go ahead, Eric.
Great, thanks, Sahar. Thank you, everyone, for spending the next hour for us. We're really thrilled with this wonderful panel and opportunity to really dive into the FDA's early feasibility program and just what it means to really venture down the early feasibility pathway, whether as an innovative physician, regulator, and so forth. And so we've built in a fair amount of time for question and answer. So we strongly encourage anybody with questions to please put them in the chat. We will have opportunities to answer them between our presentations. Our first presentation will be from Dr. Donna Buckley, and the title is Purpose and Overview of FDA's Early Feasibility Program for Medical Devices. And we'll start our presentation now. And thank you, Donna, for being here with us.
Good evening. My name's Donna Buckley. I'm an interventional radiologist at FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And I'd like to say a few words about early feasibility studies and give both an overview of the concept of an early feasibility study and discuss some of the goals of the program. I'd also like to thank Dr. Farb, who is the co-leader for FDA's EFS program, for sharing his slides. Thanks, Andy. I have no disclosures. So the EFS program is nearly 13 years old. FDA's first step in facilitating device innovation was our early feasibility studies guidance that was issued in 2013, and this was followed by the rollout of our EFS program. The program objectives were to increase patient access to potentially beneficial devices by expanding U.S. site participation in early clinical studies. We also sought to enhance collaboration amongst developers, industry, regulators, and investigators. And finally, we applied the ID regulations in order to protect patients enrolled in an early feasibility study. So lessons learned during that development process highlighted the need to apply just-in-time testing strategies so that the right tests were performed at the right time to support proof of principle and basic safety, and that catastrophic failure is unlikely. And we know that tests have limited applicability if the device is modified. Also, extensive testing may delay access to patients who have limited alternatives. So here, and it may be in some cases that it's acceptable to defer some of the non-clinical testing until the device design has been finalized for use in a pivotal study. And we also know that comprehensive testing too early in development can add costs without return. To balance that streamlined process, we noted that just-in-case risk mitigation strategies were also important to protect study subjects to make sure that there wasn't undue risk posed to the patients. So what is the value proposition for those devices that are ultimately intended to be marketed in the United States? In non-US studies, there may be additional costs and logistical issues associated with travel, language challenges. There may be questions with data quality and how it's monitored and differently. Study subjects may not be as available on the intended patient population, and even if available, the characteristics of patients may not be relevant to the US patient population. Finally, regulatory climates change and may or may not be more cumbersome at the particular time compared to the United States. If starting early in the United States, there's the opportunity to have FDA become familiar with the technology and to build consensus on a non-clinical test plan that often takes a lot more time than is allotted. And companies can also start the US IRB approval and site initiation process that can also be cumbersome in some cases and potentially accelerate the operator learning curve. Finally, if EFS sites can be pre-installed, so to speak, so to later become experienced pivotal sites. There have been numerous areas where the early feasibilities have already been employed in the cardiovascular space, and the list shown here is just a sample of devices that have been evaluated through the EFS program: carotid, baroreflex, various cardiac valves, left atrial appendage occluders, aortic endovascular and hybrid devices for the treatment of lesions in the ascending aorta and aortic arch, hemodialysis access devices, and venous valves for reducing reflux and the deep venous system. Correspondingly, there's been a wide range of clinical conditions, including acute decompensated heart failure, coronary artery disease, peripheral artery disease, renal failure, venous insufficiency, just to name a few. For an ongoing EFS, there's several paths forward. Based on knowledge gained during the study, the EFS study, one might modify the device or the procedure or certain things about the technique and iterate to study new patients. Or there could just be an expansion of the study enrollment by bringing new sites on board to gain more experience with the device and refine event rate estimates and for pivotal trial planning. Or you can transition straight into a pivotal trial to establish ultimately the evidence needed for FDA approval and commercialization. And this chart just gives you a sense of how the EFS program has been utilized across the Center for Devices. As you can see, it's been widely used in many device areas with the highest utilization in the neurological, physical medicine, and cardiovascular devices. This bar chart also gives you a snapshot of how the program has been used over time. The red bars demonstrate the number of EFS submissions, and the green bars show the number of those submissions that were approved in 30 days. You can see that the FDA has been working with stakeholders here, where the vast majority of early feasibility studies have been approved within 30 days. Within FDA, we're looking ahead to build and improve on the EFS program. We're addressing cross-cutting non-clinical issues that hold up in ESF approval, and these have included biocompatibility and chemical characterization tests, animal studies, and sterility testing predominantly. We're looking into how to enhance synergies with other FDA programs, including the Breakthrough Devices Program. That's intended to expedite review of transformative products, and the TAP program, which focuses on strategic, proactive advice through the entire product lifecycle. And here we're integrating compassionate use into EFS interactions as well to promote device development, to address unmet needs, and help support IDE approval. And we're looking to expand the program beyond the predominantly utilized cardiovascular neurological spaces. So what's happening beyond or outside FDA? Well, there are a number of activities that include working with industry and clinical site partners at MDIC, with building clinical consortia. Other resources include a toolkit for best practices that you can access, as well as a playbook. You can find the EFS Explorer on the MDIC website, and that's an online directory of EFS clinical sites to help sponsors assess the site's capabilities, identify investigators in targeted therapeutic areas, de-risk enrollment assumptions, and make evidence-based decisions. It's also a good resource because it includes the actual site coordinator contact information. In addition, beyond FDA, there's efforts to better understand CMS coverage and their impact, optimize the IRB approval process, and shorten budgeting, indemnification, and contract negotiations, and build early feasibility bench strength at the site level and accelerate startup activities and establish PIs and research coordinators as EFS site champions. The overall goal here is to shorten the time for first enrollment. And the EFS working group consists of investigators, sites, and industry. And Eileen Mijas says at the bottom of the slide here is contact information, is the point of contact at MDIC. So just to give an overview, the key milestones in an early feasibility study are to facilitate a finalized device design with specific planned use and technique, with finalized enrollment criteria, as well as have an early appreciation for the operator learning curve. And we want to develop clinically meaningful primary safety and effectiveness endpoints from the EFX experience and have good rate estimates to be able to develop a feasible sample size in the pivotal trial to ultimately demonstrate statistically validated outcomes. Within FDA, we're looking ahead to build on and improve the EFS program, so don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Donna. It's a wonderful overview. And we got a number of questions. Please encourage that we have audience participation, but we'd love for continued interaction. So please put more questions in the message bar. We're going to go through a few of them right now. And maybe, Donna, I'm just going to start at the beginning. Early stage company, device they're interested in the EFS, the early feasibility pathway. What's the next steps? How do they go reach out? Where do they get the right information? And how does that interaction start with the program and the FDA?
Well, maybe I can start and then sort of kick it over to Andy. But essentially, if the company has an understanding of who the FDA personnel are that are involved in that regulatory space, to reach out directly to the leadership there and ask for an informal meeting. We call them pre-submission meetings. And that pre-submission meeting is just pretty much an informal discussion about, sharing where their technology is going and what we can offer. If it's unclear, who to contact and where, and FDA is a big place, you can always reach out directly to Andy or I, and we could get you in contact with the right people to chat with.
Great. Andy, you're okay with that? Donna volunteered you, so yeah, okay, just making sure.
Yeah, sure. Whatever Donna said, no, but right. So when we first rolled out the program, most of the companies had thought about doing studies, but starting overseas. And the reason we initiated this program was to try to change the outmigration of early phase clinical studies back to the US because so much had been done overseas and it was perceived that it was too hard to do it here. And so, many companies, especially small companies, unfamiliar with the program and needed to hear about it, and then you could read the guidance. But there's nothing better than just talking to people, and so it was not uncommon. It's still not uncommon for individuals from companies to contact me or as Donna said, the lead reviewer and discuss, well, how to get started. Why should, we've heard about this program. We'd like to, do it here. And, but what do we need to know? How do we get going? And then it's through this pre-submission process that really it details, outlines the development strategy and why an EFS would be an appropriate first step.
Great. Well, on that note, Andy, I'm going to keep you on the hook for a moment. So we got two questions kind of overlapping. We got a bunch of questions here. And the first kind of combined question I'll say is still a question about the benefit of an EFS versus going into a pivotal right away. And another comment that the preclinical tests that are required are the same as for a pivotal FDA. So it may force companies to go OUS to do the first in-man study to get early data and support a pivotal IDE. So the question is, how does this pathway help instead of going down the OUS and Donna, you talked about this for a moment, and also is there the last part of that was any way you can speed the DFS study approval to encourage U.S. companies? So maybe just talk us through again. I think Donna, you hit on a number of these, but maybe just walk us through why this is the right pathway for people. We should be considering this before going to OUS and that overlap in testing with the pivotal IDE testing.
So we really sought to, look in the mirror and figure out why it was so hard to start in the United States. And one of those reasons was that there's the preclinical requirements to get started with, even with a small study, seemed too high. So we really thought about a gradient of non-clinical testing that was appropriate and the use of leveraging of information from all sources, whether maybe they did start overseas and had some information or use a similar device that they had access to the data for. And this is this idea of what we call just-in-time testing, such that you would, that since there would be exposure only a small number of patients in the initial studies, that the non-clinical testing would be focused on establishing basic safety and proof of concept, and get through some of those barriers, such that, let me give you an example. So you could leverage animal studies to address some of the biocompatibility tests. And you wouldn't have to do an exhaustive biocompatibility test because we know devices often are modified and iterated. So why do an entire panel of biocompatibility tests when if you modify the device based on what you learned in the initial study, then it would make no sense to repeat all those things. So you leverage as much information as you can. And so the value proposition that Donna spoke to is if you ultimately want to come and market in the United States, that you start earlier. And instead of coming, as you said, Eric, with a pivotal trial, you get the knowledge of the review team at the earliest stages, such that you sort of align the requirements from the beginning, and then you build a dossier of non-clinical testing and clinical experience to support the next phase. And when we first envisioned, I promise to stop soon. When we first envisioned the program, we thought there would be EFS, then larger feasibility trials, and then pivotal trials. But what we actually found, and this is a good thing, is that what would happen, you start with EFS, 15, 20 patients, you may or may not modify the device, but then you expand the EFS, get more experience, expand to more sites, and then go from EFS directly to pivotal. So that is shortened that's the goal, to get the pivotal trial that'll support marketing.
And that is great. I mean, we're getting a lot of questions. I was going to ask Dr. Razavi, Mahmoud, from what you heard so far, I mean, you've involved in a lot of early studies, and we've seen some of them done outside, first in man being done outside the U.S. What do you think? What do you hear so far? Do you think there'll be a shift to using this method more, or do you feel like more needs to be done to encourage early companies to use this pathway?
Well, there always more needs to be done. You never ask that question because we say yes, FDA needs to do more. But it's obviously very encouraging. It's, the statistics that Dr. Buckley showed and how many people are taking advantage of the pathway. The concerns, however, remain that from the perspective of a startup, remember when you're in the early stages and you want to do first in human studies, the state of financing at that stage is important. And so the cost of what you have to do to get through that initial one is critical. And so the barriers are still significant in the EFS pathway. The amount of paperwork and the resources and all that, still consultants needed. And I can tell you that less experienced people with the startups, maybe once or twice have done it, there is still a fear of going to the FDA, even with everything that others may tell them, that they want to make sure that whatever they learn in that early feasibility studies in US, that they're not punitive when they go to the IDE. Okay, and that's the real concern. Because you may lose credibility, it may cause higher barrier, and so that familiarity that Dr. Buckley talked about could be a double-edged sword for a startup.
Great, thanks, Mahmoud.
Yeah,
Yeah, Andy, please. No, please.
No, but I think Mahmoud raised a very good point, and so that we encourage a lot of interaction, and such that it isn't punitive, and that we understand that they're less known, and that through this interaction, that the team, the review team, then is in sync with the investigators and the sponsors in real time, knowing what's going on in the study, and such that, and then it's not us versus them, so that some companies can start elsewhere. It's the idea of starting earlier in the US, not necessarily earliest, but because that could be the real springboard to getting to pivotal trial.
Thanks, Andy. Donna, back to you for a moment. There's a question about whether OUS data or that trying to explore first in human or first in man outside the US can still be used to participate in the EFS pathway. Is that a mandate that's all be done in the US, or can you leverage outside the US data as part of this pathway?
Well, I think the goal, the overarching goal of the pathway is to get early initiation in the United States. And whether or not there's, feasibility work and there's early designs, OUS, that's great too. But I think this program is really geared towards trying to promote innovation in the United States for devices that are eventually intended to be marketed there, so that we can get an early take and be the opposite of actually punitive, but actually be more of a streamlined pathway to eventually facilitate that goal for good devices. Great.
We got a number of other questions. I think for the keep us on track, we're going to go back to a few of them. I'll just prime you, Don and Andy and Eileen as well. Some of them are about non-clinical testing, GLP testing, and how this applies to the 510(k) pathway. So you have to stay on for the next talk if you want answers to these questions. But while we noodle over that, we're going to go to our second talk now. And this is going to be a really great presentation by none other than Chris Owens, who is the CEO of R3 and a serial entrepreneur and really early pioneer in investigational cardiovascular devices. So Chris is going to talk a little bit about navigating the early device development from idea to trial and a little bit of his own experiences. So Chris, thank you again for joining us and participating in this.
My name is Chris Owens, and I'm the CEO of R3 Vascular, located in Mountain View, California. I've been in the medical device industry for about 35 years, with half my career being in the product development R&D side and the other half on the commercial side of the business. I want to thank Viva for inviting me here to provide a few thoughts on what I think is a terrific topic, going from idea to clinical trial in the medical device community. I think there are rapid changes going on in the regulatory bodies and agencies across the globe, including in the reimbursement pathways. So the timing of this topic, I think, is very pertinent. When thinking about the early concepts from idea to trial, I think there are 4 tenets that we should drive down and towards the fundamentals here. The first is, what are the basics? And that means, what is the class of the device, the global markets, the market requirements in each one of those global markets? What are you trying to achieve with the initial idea and that performance testing? That's going to drive down to the key testing requirements needed for the regulatory approvals or clearances. And then how can we ensure success and under what time frame? Looking at these decisions in terms of the class of the device and the market requirements and the global markets that we want to enter, this is going to drive a number of important questions that will need to be answered. So I highly recommend to do these early informal meetings with regulatory bodies and advisors. If you're in a large multinational strategic organization, you're going to have a lot of really smart people across the organization that can help drive some of these discussions. But don't forget about adding or including advisors to give another perspective. Secondly, I think it's really important to start thinking about your global reimbursement pathway. If you're in the US and you have existing coverage that you can follow, that's great. But if not, now you're going to have to start thinking about coding coverage and payment. And the testing that you do and the trials and publications that you end up with are going to drive whether you're going to be successful in those areas. When we think about the idea and the initial development testing, obviously you're going to do your market evaluation and your opportunity analysis. But most importantly, I think that's going to drive, and what's you're going to have to move forward with is rapid, robust prototyping. This is going to enable you to optimize quickly the product against the competitive devices. Or if you're in a new space, you can work with physicians to ensure that the performance testing is meeting those design goals or the gaps in the markets. And don't forget to early on design in manufacturing scalability and COGS reductions. This is the place to do it. If you start to think of it after you've developed the product, you're just not going to meet those requirements. High margin products are a rarity today, so it's really important to do this in the initial phases of development. And 2 key considerations for performance testing to think early on. First is your in vitro testing. These are the benchtop models that you must utilize and in most cases will be required to meet the performance goals and the demands of the product. And most importantly, make sure that you're imitating the anatomy that the product is being utilized in. Secondarily, the in vivo testing. Are you going to be required to do animal testing? And if required, what is the appropriate model? Be thoughtful in that process, reach out to your advisors, and have those early discussions with agencies to make sure you're using the right models. Through all this initial testing and the early discussions with the regulatory agencies globally, this is going to drive your testing now in terms of your regulatory approvals or clearances. So review the pertinent guidelines and do that early on to make sure you're meeting those key attributes from your testing that are going to allow a regulatory agency to make those important decisions. If those guidelines aren't thoughtfully or formally provided, consider the publications that the regulatory bodies are using to guide their testing decisions. And really critically, include enough samples that the confidence levels provide meaningful data. I've seen this happen time and time again where there's not enough samples and it just lengthens the time for development, and you're going to end up changing that anyway. So ensuring success, again, what are your first in human early feasibility work? What's your first in human formal study? Work with your credible advisors who understand the pathways forward for the global regulatory bodies or FDA. Have those early discussions with those regulatory bodies and do not take shortcuts. Build your credibility rather than damaging it. Ensure that you have the appropriate funding and focus. If you are in a large organization, make sure your budgets go through the entire development all the way through your FDA clearance or your global regulatory clearances. If you're in a startup company, make sure your investors have thought out the funding that's going to be required. Make sure you have alignment there, not only for the opportunities, but the risks. A lot of people see the success at the end, but they don't see the bumps and the trials and tribulations that occur during that journey. 2 critical factors here. Regulatory submissions should be clear and guide the reader. I can't tell you how many submissions I've read in advising companies that just wasn't the case and they would have to be rewritten. And make it easy for the regulatory bodies to understand and find the information they need to make decisions. No one knows the product better than the company. Ensure that that information is very clear for the bodies to move forward. In concluding here, do not take shortcuts or justify away meaningful testing requests. I've seen this quite often where we try to justify away them rather than doing the work, and I highly recommend not to do that. If you move forward with those pathways, you're going to expect to see lengthy regulatory body discussions and rejections. You're going to damage your credibility. You're going to have a loss or the inability to obtain reimbursement. You're going to waste funding. And in some cases, if not corrected, company or the product or the budget itself will become insolvent, which should eventually leads to product failure. So make positive long-term decisions to create a solid foundation for both the company and the product, and do the work.
That was excellent, Chris. Really appreciate your perspective, and you've done it through several companies and advised many early feasibility studies. Just want to ask you about the program, the way again is presented. Have you taken advantage of it? Or advise anybody to go through this early feasibility study and the EFS2 that is presented? Any comments on that, or things that because you were mentioning the trials and tribulations that people go to and how to make your submission as clear as possible. So any thoughts on the way the EFS2 is looking, and any advice for people going through this process?
Well, I like the changes that I've seen today, and I think that Dr. Buckley and Dr. Farber are moving in the right direction in terms of incorporating feedback from the industry. I've never personally used the EFS as of yet, but I certainly would recommend doing that. As Mahmoud has said, most of the early feasibility work that I've done, including in the current company, has been done overseas. And there are certain countries that are just a lot more favorable to do some of that very early work in terms of the regulations. It still do no harm. Make sure that you have that early testing complete, so that your product is going to achieve what you've set out in those early feasibility studies. And there are some countries that we're moving away from. For instance, a lot of times we used to be looking at Germany to go in first, and it's just become way too complicated with EU MDR. A lot of companies are doing it now in Austria or some other avenues, and still getting very robust data that can be used to supply early on for early feasibility work. At R3 Vascular, our first in human data was driven in a few countries, but primarily out of Austria. So I think those are all capabilities. But I liked what Dr. Farb said. It may not be the earliest, but it's still very credible. And I'm a big believer in talking to agencies early. I don't think it's an us versus them. They have a job to do, so respect that. But all my discussions really over 30 plus years have been extremely positive. We don't always agree, but that's the whole point. We're trying to get medical devices, to market, to be treating humans. They have to be safe. I really encourage folks now, don't go this alone. There's a lot of smart people out there. Don't be afraid to reach out to the regulatory agencies.
Great. Brian, you had some comments.
Yeah, I actually just have a question for maybe both Chris and Donna and Andrew. Many studies in many sites in the U.S. and many institutions have done participate in pivotal trials, but many fewer have been involved in some of these early feasibility trials, especially first in human. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the characteristics are of an institution that make it appropriate or appropriate site for a first in human study. I imagine that, obviously we've seen many of these studies done out of the U.S. for various reasons, medical, legal reasons, et cetera. But are there certain things you're looking for in working with a site, either, Chris, from the standpoint of R3 or other companies you've been involved in, that make a specific institution more likely to be able to manage first in human studies or some of these early studies than other institutions?
I'm happy to answer that first. Whether it's this company or some of the other companies that I've been with, a lot of folks think it might be just high volume accounts. And of course that does play a role. But the research coordinator infrastructure at your institutions is one of the most critical things that we look at in terms of success. Follow up on patients. Those things are really, really important. Of course, you have to have the high volume. And then I think also, one of the things that we really look at are the credibility of the physicians that we're working with. Do they have credibility with the agencies? Do they do good work? Do they have great hands? Those things are all part of this in terms of looking at that. So, high volume, of course, but the quality of the infrastructure to generate that data is the most important thing globally for us.
It's a great conversation, and we have a unique ecosystem for vascular devices in the U.S. One, we see a lot of use of practices outside of hospitals, so we have a lot of office-based labs and ambulatory surgical centers who are also doing research. And then two, we have a lot of devices that fall into the 510(k) pathway. There is one question about, is there any role for an EFS pathway for a 510(k) clearance, or is that a completely different can of worms, and we should think of these as two different pathways? I'll give that back to Donna, Andy, or Eileen.
So I can start. So there's no difference, right? I mean, it's what for most of the 510(k)s that we see don't require clinical data, but some do, and especially that's required. So the EFS program can be used for that. Donna, have you had some experience with 510(k)s in early phase clinical studies?
Yeah, I don't recall off the top of my head, but yeah, it's independent of the final regulatory pathway for marketing, de novo, 510(k), PMA. It's just whether or not it requires clinical data to support that marketing application.
Right.
And anything that does need some clinical experience, then the EFS program is open to them.
Right.
And what about, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I mean,
No,
these are small studies. They're not statistically valid studies. It's like you're gathering information about learning about your device and how it works and whether you need to make changes or not. But it's agnostic to the regulatory pathway.
And what about combo devices? We see this also a lot where it's a medical device, but also there's an infusion or a drug or some reason why it would sit in two different offices. Is that something that also falls in this pathway, or is there collaboration when those devices are being vetted?
Go ahead, Donna.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're talking about sort of a state. I mean, yes, it's agnostic to that as well. Combination products, whether or not it has a drug or biologic, it's the same thing. It might have some nuances in terms of which center has primary review responsibility, whether it's biologics or drugs or devices. But regardless, the program is available.
Yeah. So, for example, if we're having a device that uses ablation energy to treat heart failure, we'll pull in our experts who are from EP and also the heart failure experts who work together. So that's just routine for us.
Great. Sorry, you want to introduce our next talk, and we'll keep it going.
All right, yeah. So we're excited to have Eileen Mijas, and I think from MDIC, and I think it's great to hear her perspective. And so please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank Viva for putting this hour-long webinar on early feasibility studies together. My name is Eileen Mijas. I am the head of the Center for Evidence and Patient Engagement at the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. And I'm going to be talking about the case example for EFS and some pearls for success. And before we get started, I'm sure there's quite a few of you online that might not be familiar with who the Medical Device Innovation Consortium is. MDIC is a 501c3 public-private partnership that brings together stakeholders across the medtech ecosystem to help accelerate access to medical technologies and improve patient outcomes. So we convene industry, FDA, CMS, providers, as well as patients to really try and solve these complex challenges in a collaborative, pre-competitive, safe space. So we work on advancing regulatory science by developing practical tools and frameworks, playbooks that help reduce risk and improve predictability across the entire product lifecycle. And this works towards our mission of helping to bring safe and effective technologies to patients faster. And so MDIC over this past year has really evolved to reflect today's medtech landscape. So organizing around 3 centers of excellence, one of them being manufacturing, innovation, and quality, digital health technologies, and then evidence and patient engagement. And that's where early feasibility studies falls. So these areas are intentionally interconnected. So manufacturing, digital tools, and patient engagement all influence evidence generation, regulatory pathways, as well as access. And this integrated structure really strengthens our impact across the full device life cycle. And so our goal is to streamline the US EFS ecosystem to accelerate innovation to patients. And again, we do this by partnering with FCA, CMS, industry, clinicians, and patients, as well as clinical sites, to help improve this efficiency and really shorten study startup as well as first patient enrolled timelines. And so this slide demonstrates real progress, but also real pain points. So we know that FDA pathways are more streamlined with clearer EFS guidance and better early alignment. However, some just-in-time elements like biocompatibility and design changes can still create some delays. So MDIC and the Heart and Valve Collaboratory have really worked hard at operationalizing these best practices through playbooks, collaboration across sponsors, sites, CROs, as well as FDA. And really the biggest bottlenecks that we're seeing are really at the site level. So the IRBs, the contracts, staffing, as well as patient workflows. And EFS, we know, is more efficient at FDA. The next step is really about improving the site operations and standardizing these processes so we can scale success. And so this slide is just demonstrate this is a result of years worth of work. So this work has been going on since 2016. In 2019 was when MDIC and our partners consistently were convening as stakeholders, developed the first EFS playbook with a bunch of templates on contracting, among other things, and really starting this transition to translating insights into tangible tools like site network, and then as well as a centralized directory to improve EFS performance, which I'll go over a little bit later. And so how we got here. So for our recent new updated resources, this timeline really shows that EFS 2.0 has been a progression. It hasn't been a single event. So in June of 2024, we held a virtual event with the Heart and Valve Collaboratory and really surfaced some of the real operational pain points. Then in 2025, we shifted to action through the EFS 2.0 workshop in Washington, D.C. And from there, from 2025 to 2026, we created 4 working groups that aligned on solutions across site selection, budgeting, contracting, as well as operations. And so now in 2026, we're working towards, we just had our 1 year at the Heart and Valve Collaboratory Summit, the meeting in DC where we initiated this work, and we were able to showcase the resources that have been worked on over this past year, really trying to move from dialogue to building a real infrastructure. And then what success looks like. So really, we want startup times faster. We want budget predictability. And we also want reduced site burnout throughout these process. And ultimately, we want to improve innovation velocity within the United States. And this slide just shows the scope of the EFS playbook. So this is a full life cycle guide. It's not just a checklist. It covers everything from regulatory and CMS context, site startups, IRBs, budgeting, contracting, and then moves through protocol development, execution, as well as iterative design. And then it also addresses emerging challenges at the end. And this really demonstrates that EFS really continues to evolve and is very dynamic, and we need to be continuously working on this. And this is, the goal is really to have created a practical end-to-end resource supporting both sponsors and sites from concept all the way through completion. And then this slide is just demonstrating what's inside of the playbook. So practical ways to be able to implement these processes includes end-to-end process maps, FDA engagement checklists, operational tools, and really the goal is usable off-the-shelf resource to improve predictability and execution across EFS. So in addition to the playbook, we've developed ready-to-use templates to reduce variability and speed execution. This is our budgeting template, as well as a site feasibility tool, which is something that we're going to end up wanting in our second version of EFS Explorer, which is what I'll talk about in a second. And really, this Accelerate EFS toolkit brings together practical deployable resources that really improve standardization and reduce that startup friction. This is just to mention in June of 25, MDIC came out with 2 biocompatibility resources, one on biocompatibility considerations for EFS and another on best practices for material supplier selection. And that is all on our the MDIC website. And so EFS Explorer, so what is this? It's a centralized tool, online tool to support EFS site identification. So what we did, we worked in collaboration with Veranex as well as the Heart and Valve Collaboratory to aggregate clinical data from clinicaltrials.gov with curated insights. So we really want to try to help sponsors quickly find end-to-end and find and contact experienced EFS sites. So why this matters as a little more streamlined is because it really is an evaluation of early phase trials. It enables a quick assessment of site experience and activity, and then it also just improves visibility. And we want our core pilot sites to be committing to updating the site feasibility checklist on a 6-month basis, as well as it'll be known if sites want to utilize our clinical trial agreement that we've created, as well as in the future, hopefully putting performance metrics on here. And so just some pearls for EFS success. So Andy probably mentioned this earlier, engage FDA early and often. Resolve any biocompatibility strategy issues up front. You want to talk about those in the just-in-time testing, again, early and often. You want to standardize before you negotiate, so try to use the budgeting template. That's going to help streamline those conversations. And then also choose sites with EFS experience. And it's not just the academic centers that are efficient at EFS. There's a lot of community centers that are very successful as well. And then really just think about the total product life cycle from day one. And so just some keys for success on the clinical site perspective. So you really need an engaged PI, or someone who's going to be an advocate for this study. You need really, really good, strong connections across your business units. You need support from your C-suite. You want to be in consistent contact with both legal, IRB, finance, to be able to have that kind of clear communication and them to know to prioritize these early feasibility studies, even with just the minimal patient enrollment. And then also have a really good, strong relationship with your study sponsor. And it's very important to have strong research coordinators and a very strong, committed study team. And so within interventional cardiology, very good at patching problems. You see a blockage, you deploy a stent, and then that fixes the immediate problem. But everyone here also knows that the long-term outcome isn't dependent on that single moment within a cath lab. It's really dependent on the entire ecosystem around you. So the conversations you're having with the patient, guideline-directed therapy, follow-up, the infrastructure, as well as coordination. And so EFS is really, this 2.0 is really the same idea. This isn't just a one-time procedural fix, one-time conversation to help start up delays. We're working to really build a durable infrastructure. So early innovation in the US doesn't depend on fire drills, but on a repeatable modern system. So what's next? We are looking for broader adoption of the toolkit. We want to start collecting metrics, expand beyond structural, and continue refining our working groups to see what needs to be worked on. And this is just a QR code for the Accelerate EFS toolkit. On here, you'll find all of our resources that were created. You'll see that it's in preview mode. We plan to have a hard launch at the end of June. So right now we're really looking and promoting feedback. You can provide your feedback. There's a button right there. I think it's not even a 5-minute survey. So please feel free to pass this around to folks who you think would benefit from it, as well as provide feedback. And this is just a slide with all of the folks who worked on these resources. And that's the end of my presentation. So thanks for everyone for listening in.
Great. Thank you, Eileen, for that wonderful overview of what MDIC has to offer. So, just for the early entrepreneur who's listening to our call, we've talked a little bit about directly emailing Donna and Andy for EFS or going through the FDA, but when did you get involved? Should we recommend people go to the MDIC website first, download some of these tools and use them to guide their pre-submission calls, or will you kind of come in later based on the early conversations with the FDA? How do we fold the two together?
I think honestly, you can do that concurrently. I mean, I am, as I've heard, come to FDA early and often. So I think that's, your priority, but taking a look at an overview of these resources and seeing what you need help with and it really does break things down fairly simply. And the playbook is a lengthy document, but you can dive into wherever you need to. Not everything's going to be relevant for the clinical site or the sponsor. So, I would suggest concurrently. Yeah.
Right. This is great, Eileen. I think this would be a great way to kind of bridge the gap and help kind of lower the barrier for anyone who is involved in this program. I saw that a lot of your discussion was about heart and valve, and I think that made a lot of strides. And in the vascular space, so what is needed from the vascular community to take advantage of MDIC and this pathway? What do you think the next steps are? Is it more companies submitting, or more forums like this to kind of build more toolkits or more specific for vascular devices? What do you think the next step to have more engagement?
Any kind of engagement that for clinicians, like typically what we have done with we started in structural heart, right? That's where the EFS program initially started, and we have a working group within neurovascular, electrophysiology. So we need the physicians as well as the industry and your engagement and reaching out to me. And I think forums like this have been extremely helpful just to get the word out, and doing it consistently, I think is what's going to really be able to help.
Yeah, I was going to say, Eileen, I think awareness is really critical, especially if you're a company that doesn't have a lot of experience in this. What a resource. And I certainly will be recommending it for companies that don't have this kind of experience.
That's great to hear. I think some of those site selection tools, contracting and whatnot, I think those are particularly important. And we kind of commented, Brian, asked a nice question about that also from a site standpoint. Chris, any experience with that on the contracting side, or ways that maybe this will better future processes in early FIM or feasibility studies?
Yeah, I think there is another key point in terms of your site selection, and Eileen referred to it, is that you need a very strong, engaged PI, because as you're going through these budget and contracts, it's really critical to get that support to push some of these through. I know in many companies that I've been, we've avoided sites, frankly, that had great physician community and research, but if it takes you a year to get into the site and they want to completely redraft your contract or charge way more than somebody else, being in the industry for now, we don't even contact those sites anymore. So I think there's a real opportunity, as you're looking at selecting your sites, be mindful to make sure you have a very credible PI that can help you walk through that contracting and budgeting process.
There are some specific questions. I think we'll try to go through them quickly. And Donna or Andy, can data derived from peer-reviewed clinical use experience be used in the EFS pathway?
So we're open to a wide net of data to help support the EFS IDE, and that can be from information in the public domain. It can be leverage information from earlier prototypes of a device. It can be from other sources that are available to sponsors. The idea is that you justify why the information is enough to support going into humans in the U.S. and then go through what we call a device evaluation strategy of the essential information that is available to support that the device is likely to perform as intended, and that if there are failure modes, you have capabilities to address them with based on the site experience. And I think this gets back to the previous discussion about picking good sites, because that's a real good risk mitigation strategy and plans to address any failures that might occur. So, but the short answer is yes, all those things are on the table.
You know, on that note, Andy and Donna, you know, there's a lot of questions about the hurdle of the non-clinical testing, whether it's the GLP testing, the biocompatibility, the sterilization. How, you know, I think Donna, you touched on this a little bit, and Andy too, about avoiding redundant testing as you iterate, trying to avoid, again, having to do things twice. Any advice? But it seems like there's still a lot of concern or maybe even frustration about the non-clinical testing that occurs, and if that can be bettered through this pathway.
So I could start with the GLP, because this comes up a question all the time, and the guidance actually has a section about GLP. And while GLP is a good thing, we also recognize that non-GLP studies can be used to support an EFS IDE, as long as the deviations from GLP are mitigated and explained, you know, why the animal study data are, you know, still valid and can be used. So it's really just a discussion about why that information is adequate. Biocompatibility is still a challenge, and on our side, it's really to make sure that the review teams are still utilizing EFS principles of, you know, appropriate leveraging where justified of other information that can address you know, the basic biocompatibility concerns. So those are the kind of the idea is that the sponsor and the review team come to consensus about what's required and to get going in the United States. And so even if you know, the sponsor is doing some study, has done studies outside the United States, starting those discussions earlier with FDA review staff can really help get to approvals, and then, you know, support a bigger study later on.
Can I just ask Mahmoud and Brian, just to give, you know, again, the clinical perspective? I mean, we heard about MDIC, I think the progress they've made with structural and such, about, again, the vascular community, you know, increasing the engagement and increasing innovation, innovators who are interested in this. How do you think we can increase that engagement from you just, you know, a clinical perspective? Seems like it's a lot of great resources there. And I think we just need to kind of up our game from the vascular community to take advantage of it. So from just listening to this discussion, I mean, do you see an opportunity there? What would be advice or next steps you think we should take as a community?
So yeah, so you know, dissemination of information goes both ways, and it's important that the sites are also aware that what we saw and the information you get on the MDIC is not just for the sponsors. It's actually quite helpful to the sites also, and to get them ready, because there is, as you all know, there's a paucity of EFS-ready sites in the U.S. And while you can find a lot of sites that can do good pivotal studies, that's different, because the enrollment criteria and all of that is going to be different. The contracting process, as Chris mentioned, is still a bear, and that, unfortunately, in the U.S., I can see that has migrated out of the academic centers, where this traditionally has been really difficult, into settings such as ours, that is just a, you know, large hospital sort of setting, but the contracting is become really difficult. And that's why I think where MDIC can come in and be quite helpful.
Yeah, I'll just add to that and say that you know, this is why this webinar was really exciting to bring to the public and to our Viva viewers, because of the fact that many of us don't know all of these details and all these resources that are available. So this is a nice discussion to have, to kind of go over some of that. My own experience in working with the FDA is mirrors what I've heard for many years. The more you work with them, that you realize the FDA representatives really want to help get through this process. You know, they're not there as an obstacle by any stretch. They're just there to make sure that the right steps are taken so that we have safe devices for our patients and our, you know, everyone I've worked with at the FDA and other regulatory bodies have been very happy to help through this process in the proper way. Mahmoud's point about the contracting and many other aspects of our institutional processes is very correct. There, you know, some of the academic centers have a lot of challenges that we have to navigate, and some of the maybe private entities don't have quite as many burdens, I would say. That said, I think Chris brought up the fact that a responsive PI that is very engaged and will help drive the project through is actually very important. And you know, my experience in dealing with our contract office, no matter which institution I've been at, which academic institution, is things can stall out at times, and a physician that engages the different parties at their own institution to help push the contracting through or sort of highlight the importance of the project that you're working on does have some traction and does help things get things done more quickly. So as a clinician, I would not underestimate your ability to help drive some of these processes, because a lot of it does get weighed down in our administrative with our administrative staff.
Great. On that note, I mean, this has been really excellent discussion. We learned a lot about the early feasibility pathway, and the FDA and MDIC can you know, basically share and help with. So excellent discussion. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and will be available to review again at vivafoundation.org. So I encourage you to go there. And also, just a reminder to everybody that the Viva and Veins meeting will be in October. It'll be a month earlier this year, October 3rd to 7th. So hopefully we'll see you all there. It's been an excellent discussion. Thanks all for sharing your time with us, and have a good evening. Good night.